They laughed as she scrubbed the floor on her knees like she wasn't once a wife, a mother, a woman with dreams. But one man didn't laugh. He saw the pain, the strength, and the son he couldn't raise alone. The saloon doors slammed behind her like a prison gate, and Ruth Harper didn't flinch. She was already on her knees, hands raw from lie, her skirt soaked through with stale beer and spit. Her fingers worked faster at the sound of laughter behind her. Boots scraped the floor. Someone spat. Another tossed a coin that clinked near her pail but didn't reach her hand. She didn't look up. She learned not to. Not when the stairs burned worse than fire. Not when her dignity had already been bled out months ago with the last of her hope. "Hey, widow," a voice drawled. "You missed a spot. Might as well put your back into it. That's all it's good for now." The men roared. Ruth didn't stop scrubbing. She didn't speak. Not because she didn't have words, she had 1,000, but because she'd learned they did more harm than good in places like this. Words made you memorable, and women like her couldn't afford to be remembered. Her knees ached. The bone felt like it might grind through the wood itself, but she kept going. The barkeep didn't like delay, and if she finished fast, she could maybe have half a biscuit and lukewarm tea before bed. If Millie hadn't taken it already. If rats hadn't gotten to it first. The laughter died down as the card game resumed. The pianist hit a few broken notes before giving up again. Ruth wrung out the rag and moved to the next square of floor, eyes focused, heart detached. That was how she survived, by disappearing into the work, letting her body move while her soul fled far from Dodge Ridge. But not far enough. Not so far she didn't hear the whispers. Not so far she didn't remember the woman she used to be. The one who sang hymns with her boy in the chapel. The one who planted bluebells by the porch and kept warm bread ready for when her husband rode home. That woman was dead. She died the night the fever took Samuel and the week after a mining collapse took James. She had no one left now. No reason to smile. No hands to hold. Just dirt and sweat, and the humiliation of being pitied by women and pawed at by drunks. Then came the boots. Different this time. Not the worn scuffs of cowhands or the slouchy saunter of a gambler. No, these were heavy, purposeful, too clean for this part of town. She heard them pause behind her just past her shoulder. She didn't turn. Didn't want to see another face twisted in mockery or pity. "You Ruth Harper." The voice wasn't cruel, wasn't soft either, just steady, like someone who didn't ask unless they wanted a real answer. She nodded slowly, wringing her hands against her apron before daring to glance up. The man was older than most who passed through the saloon, late 40s maybe, with dust in the folds of his coat and sun lines across his cheeks. His beard was trimmed, not out of vanity but discipline. A wide hat shadowed most of his expression, but his eyes, those she saw clearly, tired but not hollow, searching. "I need to speak with you," he said simply. Ruth blinked. "If it's about work, I clean the floor and nothing else." A few nearby patrons snorted. The barkeep, a thick-bellied man with red knuckles and a permanent scowl, leaned on the counter. "If you're looking for virtue, mister, you came to the wrong place. Try the chapel, though I reckon even God turns his face these days." The stranger didn't even glance his way. His eyes stayed on Ruth. "It's not about that," he said. "It's about my son." That made her stop. He took off his hat then, holding it in both hands with a respect that didn't belong in a saloon full of spilled gin and bad memories. "Name S. Alden Graves," he said. "I got a ranch 2 days west. My wife passed 6 months back. I've been trying to raise Ethan on my own. He's 8. He ain't speaking much since she died. Won't eat right. Won't sleep. My house is full of ghosts, ma'am, and I reckon he's drowning in M." Ruth stared at him, unsure if this was some cruel trick or joke. But Alden Graves didn't look like a man who wasted words. "And you want me," she said quietly, "to do what exactly?" "To come with me," he replied. "Not as a servant, not as a nurse, but as a presence, A woman, someone kind, someone who knows what grief is. He doesn't need discipline, he needs comfort. And I can't do it alone. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet Ruth's throat tightened in a way it hadn't in years. "I don't even know your boy," she whispered. Alden's voice cracked just enough to betray the cost of the words. "And he doesn't know you, but I reckon you two might understand each other better than most." Behind them, laughter rose again. Coins clattered. Someone cursed at the cards. And Ruth realized in that moment that if she said no, she'd be on her knees here tomorrow and the next day and the next, until her body gave out or her heart turned to stone. "I don't have anything," she said slowly. "No clothes but these, no money, nothing fit for a child." "You've got gentleness," Alden said. "That's more than most." It shouldn't have been enough, and yet it was. Ruth stood. Her legs trembled not from fatigue but the weight of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a choice. She gathered her shawl, still damp from scrub water, and faced the barkeep. "I quit." He scoffed. "You'll be back begging in a week." "Maybe," she said, "but not tomorrow." Alden didn't offer his arm, just nodded once and stepped back, giving her the space to walk free. Ruth followed him out into the night, leaving behind the smell of smoke, liquor, and shame. The moon was high, the sky clear, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked up. They rode out before dawn, just the two of them. Ruth didn't ask questions and Alden didn't offer stories, but silence wasn't empty between them. It was restful, like the quiet before spring returns. By the time the sun crested the hills, Ruth's fingers were frozen and her spine ached from the saddle, but she didn't complain. She was leaving something behind. Whether what waited ahead was better, she didn't know, but it was different, and different for now was enough. They reached the ranch late afternoon the next day. The land stretched wide and raw, dotted with fence posts and scattered cattle. The house itself was modest, 2 floors with chipped paint and a porch that creaked under Alden's boots, but it stood strong. A small boy sat on the steps, knees hugged to his chest. He didn't look up as they approached. "That's Ethan," Alden said, dismounting. "He don't talk much, not anymore." Ruth didn't approach right away. She slid off her horse, knees stiff, and waited. After a minute, the boy looked at her. His eyes were rimmed red, not from crying, but from the sheer effort of not doing so. "Hello, Ethan," she said gently. He blinked once, then looked away. Alden stepped inside, giving them space. Ruth sat slowly on the step beside the boy, not touching him, not crowding him, just there, like a quiet presence beside a storm. They sat like that as the wind picked up and dusk fell. No words, just being. She understood that kind of silence. It was the same kind that had once filled her own home. And maybe, just maybe, it could be broken. The wind carried the last light of evening across the open plains, brushing the porch like a whisper neither of them spoke aloud. Ruth sat still beside the boy, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight not from pride, but from years of having no other choice. Ethan didn't move much, but she could feel the small shifts in his breathing, tight, wary, like a creature not yet sure if the one beside him meant harm or help. Ruth didn't rush. She knew better than to fill silence with noise. Some grief didn't take kindly to chatter. It had to breathe on its own, like a fire starved of air. So she stayed there beside him as the stars came out, as the creak of the porch gave way to the quiet groan of the earth settling into night. Inside, the soft clatter of pans hinted that Alden was preparing supper. The smell of beans and bread drifted through the open window. Ethan's stomach growled once, sharp and involuntary, but still he didn't move. Ruth let it sit. A child who'd closed off his world that tight wouldn't be pried open with a meal. He needed more than food. He needed safety. And safety wasn't declared, it was proven. When Alden finally called from inside, his voice low but firm, Ethan didn't move until Ruth stood and offered a hand, not to pull him, but to show him he could follow if he chose. Slowly, the boy rose and shuffled in behind her, his eyes flicking to hers once as if weighing something in silence. She gave him nothing but a gentle nod, then stepped into the house. The cabin was clean, sparsely furnished, worn wooden floorboards, a hearth with charred logs stacked neatly beside it, 2 chairs near a modest table, 1 patched sofa, and a staircase that led to the upper room. A shelf held books arranged by use rather than size, manuals, scriptures, an old poetry collection missing its spine. Alden stood at the stove, spooning beans into tin bowls. He didn't turn when they entered, didn't fuss or force a welcome. Just placed the bowls on the table and sat down like this was normal. Like this was already a family meal. Ethan climbed into the chair across from Ruth. He didn't speak, didn't eat right away either. He just looked at the bowl as if deciding whether this too was some trap disguised as kindness. Ruth took a bite of her food first, slow, steady, grateful. She let the warmth sink into her belly before speaking. "I used to make this every Friday," she said softly, not looking at either of them. "With a bit of cornbread if we had it. My son always picked out the onions, said they were too slimy." Ethan's eyes flicked toward her again. That was all. She smiled faintly. "I still haven't forgiven him." Alden let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. But he said nothing, just chewed slow, watching the two of them from beneath his brow. Eventually, Ethan reached for his spoon. It wasn't a victory parade. No trumpets, just a bite of beans swallowed in silence. But Ruth felt something shift, quiet and deep, like thawed ground beneath frozen snow. That night Alden offered her the upstairs room. She declined. "I'll take the cot by the fire," she said, already folding a blanket over her arm. "You sure?" he asked. "It ain't much." "It's warm," she replied, "and I've slept colder." He didn't argue, just nodded and fetched an extra quilt. The cot creaked under her weight, but she didn't mind. She lay there in the dim glow of the hearth, listening to the wood pop and hiss. Upstairs, faint footsteps paced, paused, then padded softly to stillness. Ruth closed her eyes. She expected dreams to come, but none did. Just quiet. For once, quiet was enough. The days that followed passed with a rhythm neither rushed nor slow. Ruth rose before dawn, helped boil water and gathered eggs from the coop out back. Ethan watched from a distance at first, hovering by the porch steps or peeking around corners. Ruth never called him over. She just worked with quiet purpose, humming sometimes under her breath, not songs of joy, but the kind of old hymns that wrapped around pain like a balm. By the 3rd morning, he followed her out. Didn't speak, didn't help, but when she left the last egg in the nest box, he reached in and took it gently in both hands, as if it might shatter from more than just a fall. Alden noticed, of course. He said little, but she saw the change in his eyes. The way his shoulders loosened each evening when he returned from checking fence lines or tending cattle. The lines around his mouth didn't vanish, but they softened. Still, not all days were quiet. On the 5th morning, Ethan didn't come down for breakfast. Ruth knocked softly, but there was no answer. Alden's brow furrowed. He's never locked the door before. She waited. "Let me." He hesitated, then stepped back. Ruth opened the door slowly. Ethan sat curled in the far corner of the room, his small frame hunched over something he gripped tight in his hands. A faded ribbon, frayed at the edges. Ruth didn't need to ask whose it had been. "I didn't mean to make him forget," she said gently, "just to help him remember without drowning." Alden stood in the hallway, silent. Ruth stepped into the room. She sat beside Ethan, not too close. "I know what it's like to want everyone to go away," she said softly. "I know what it's like to think God forgot you." Ethan's head turned just slightly. "But he didn't," Ruth whispered. "I promise you that. Sometimes he just waits for someone else to help carry the pain." Slowly, Ethan reached out and placed the ribbon in her lap. Ruth pressed it between her palms, like it was something sacred. And for him it was. That night Alden came to her by the hearth, not with questions, not with thanks, just a mug of warm milk and 2 pieces of honey bread. He asked for it, he said his mama used to make it when he couldn't sleep. Ruth blinked back tears she didn't want to show. She sounds like she was a good woman. She was, he said, too good for this world. Ruth nodded. I had a husband once and a son, both gone now. Alden looked at her. I'm sorry. She met his eyes. Me too. The fire crackled between them. For a long time neither spoke. Then Alden cleared his throat. He smiles now, not often, but it's there, that's you. Ruth shook her head. That's him. They sat in silence again, but it wasn't heavy. It was shared. It was healing. 2 weeks passed before trouble came. It rode in on 3 horses, mean-looking men with dust on their coats and trouble in their eyes. Alden saw them from the ridge and came down fast, jaw tight. Who are they? Ruth asked as she scrubbed the porch rail. Brothers, Alden muttered. Crawford boys, always sniffing around looking to claim what ain't theirs. She stood, drying her hands. Do they want the ranch? Probably, or what's on it. The riders dismounted slow, eyes crawling over the house, the fences, and then Ruth. One tipped his hat. Didn't know you took on help, Alden. She's not help, Alden said flatly. The man smirked. Right, of course, housekeeper, widow type. I hear they work cheap. Ruth didn't flinch. She stepped forward, calm but firm. This widow has a shotgun behind the door and knows how to use it. The man's smirk faltered. Just a joke. Don't come here again, Alden said, stepping beside her. You've had your warnings. The Crawfords backed off, but not far. They mounted slow, glaring all the while. This ain't over, Graves, the tallest said. You can't keep what don't belong. Ruth watched them go, her jaw tight. Alden exhaled. They'll be back. She looked at him. Then so will we. He turned to her, and for the first time something more than gratitude filled his eyes. Something uncertain, something fragile, something close to hope. But neither spoke it. Not yet. There was still time. The wind shifted by morning and the horizon turned the color of steel. It wasn't just weather, it was a warning. Ruth felt it in her bones, that creeping weight in the air before something snapped. Alden had gone out early with Ethan to mend the western fence line, and the silence left behind in the house felt uneasy, stretched too tight. Ruth busied herself not out of habit but out of survival. She swept, not for dust, but to keep her hands from trembling. She scrubbed the pots and tended to the chickens, but her eyes drifted often toward the ridgeline where Alden and Ethan had disappeared. She tried not to think about the Crawfords, about the way their words had lingered like flies on meat, buzzing just beneath her skin. The porch creaked around midday, and she looked up to find Ethan returning ahead of his father, his cheeks flushed, hair mussed by wind. He carried a small bundle, twigs, leaves, and a rough feather stuck into the side. I made it, he said, voice just above a whisper. For Mama, but I want you to have it. Ruth knelt and took the bundle gently, as if it were spun glass. Her throat caught. It's beautiful, she murmured. Thank you. Ethan nodded once and turned toward the barn without waiting for praise. Ruth watched him go, her heart thudding too hard. He was opening, slowly, carefully. But the boy was beginning to see her, not just as someone in the house, but someone in his life. She couldn't let that be taken. That evening, Alden returned quiet, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. Fence line has been cut, he said, barely waiting for her to ask. Deliberate, top wire pulled clean, post hacked halfway through. Ruth set down the stew ladle. You think it's them. I know it's them. What do they want? They want this land. They think because I haven't remarried, haven't hired hands, that I'm weak, that I can't hold on to what's mine. And if they're right. He looked at her hard then, the weariness etched deep into his face. Then Ethan loses everything. She didn't say what she was thinking, that he'd already lost more than any child should, that another loss might crush what little trust had begun to grow. "We'll find a way," she said instead. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to sleep and the fire burned low, Ruth sat at the table sewing a torn shirt sleeve. Alden poured 2 mugs of hot water and sat across from her, the quiet between them no longer awkward, just worn in like an old pair of boots. "You've changed this house," he said finally. Ruth didn't look up. It was already standing. No, it stood, yes, but it didn't breathe. Not since Mary died. It's like the windows were open again, like he's got color in his face, like I can breathe. She nodded, her needle paused. "And you're afraid it won't last?" "I'm afraid I can't keep it." He didn't have to say more. She understood. "What would it take," she asked, "to stop them?" Alden rubbed a hand down his face. "Legally, proof, boundary markers, witnesses. But that doesn't stop men like the Crawfords. They don't care about laws. They care about intimidation, and they know I'm outnumbered. They'll bleed me slow until I either give up or they find a way to force my hand." Ruth stared into her mug, steam curling up like smoke. "You said they were brothers." "3, older, raised hard. They've got guns and tempers and no one in town dares cross them. I've managed to keep 'em at bay, but now they smell weakness." "And what if we didn't let them?" Alden tilted his head. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Ruth said carefully, "you're not alone anymore." He looked at her for a long time and something passed between them. Not a plan, not yet, but an understanding that what they had, whatever it was, deserved a fight. The next week passed without incident, but not without tension. Ruth took Ethan into town for supplies, and the boy clung closer than usual. She didn't question it. The saloon was quiet in the early morning, but the glances they got were anything but. The barkeep who once laughed at her now wouldn't meet her eye. The butcher gave her a discount he didn't offer others, murmuring something about God watching over the decent. They were building something here. A reputation, a presence, it mattered. At the general store, Ethan picked out a tin whistle. Ruth was about to tell him they couldn't afford it, but the look on his face, quiet hope, stopped her. "You play it outside," she said. "Not during supper and not when someone's resting." He nodded fast, eyes wide, and she handed over the coins. On the way back, she caught a rider on the edge of town watching them, one of the Crawfords. Not approaching, just watching. She didn't tell Alden that night, but she loaded the rifle the next morning before feeding the hens. 2 days later, the sky broke open with rain. It came sudden, heavy, the kind that turned dirt to mire and made roofs groan. Ruth rushed to bring the quilts down from the line. Ethan stood under the eaves with his whistle, blowing notes off-key, laughing as the wind stole the sound. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. She nearly wept at the sound. By evening, the storm passed. Alden brought in firewood with mud up to his knees. Ruth met him with a dry towel. "Storm's clearing," he said. "But it ain't over," she finished. He nodded. That night, after the dishes were done and Ethan had gone to sleep, they heard it. A horse alone, hooves on packed earth. Alden stood slowly, Ruth behind him. He took the rifle down from the wall, checked the chamber, and stepped out onto the porch. A single rider. Crawford. The youngest one, Reed, sat his horse with a smug grin and a bottle in hand. "Evenin', Graves," he called. "Heard you took in a stray. Thought I'd come by and see if she needed escorting back to town. Women like her don't belong on a ranch." Ruth stepped forward. "And men like you don't belong near children." Reed grinned wider. "Feisty, I like that." Alden raised the rifle, not aimed, but clear. "You done?" he asked. Reed spat. "This land's ours, Graves. You can dress it up, pretend it's a home, but it won't last. We're common. And when we do, no saloon girl or orphaned brat's gonna stop us." Ruth didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared him down until he laughed and turned his horse. As he disappeared down the trail, Alden lowered the rifle. "They're pushing," he muttered. "They're testing," Ruth corrected, "to see if we'll bend." "And will we?" She looked at him then, eyes fierce. "No, not for them." 2 days later, Ruth woke to smoke. Not fire, just the smell of something burned. She ran to the barn. A small blaze had scorched the outer wall, but the rain days prior had left the wood too damp to catch. The damage was minor, but the message was clear. Ethan stood nearby, clutching his whistle. "They were here," he whispered. She knelt before him. "You didn't get hurt." He shook his head. "Did you see them?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "3, they laughed. 1 kicked the fence. I was in the hayloft." Ruth swallowed hard. She stood, eyes scanning the horizon. Alden came pounding across the yard, breath ragged. He saw the scorch mark and his face went pale. "They're done warning," he said. "Next time they won't just burn a wall." Ruth nodded. And then, for the first time, she spoke the truth out loud. "Then we make sure there isn't a next time." They spent that afternoon preparing, not in frantic bursts, but in quiet, measured tasks that carried more weight than the hammer or wood they worked with. Alden reinforced the shutters and walked the property line twice, checking every post and gate. Ruth patched the old barn roof as best she could, despite the climb and the risk, because if it rained again and the Crawfords tried fire a second time, she wouldn't leave shelter to chance. Ethan followed them both without needing to be asked, his whistle tied to a leather string around his neck like a talisman. The boy didn't talk much that day, not about the fire or the laughter he'd heard in the dark, not about what it meant that 3 men had been standing just outside the place he'd begun to feel safe in. But he watched and he listened, and he carried boards when Ruth asked and held nails when Alden reached back without a word. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He stayed. That night Alden unrolled the maps he kept folded in a drawer beneath the books on the shelf. The property line stretched wide, and though the land was modest in parts, it had one key feature the Crawfords had always wanted: access to the creek that fed the southern ranches. Without it, their herds dried out in July. With it, they controlled trade across the lower valley. Ruth leaned over the table as Alden traced his finger across the lines. "They want this," he said. "Not for the house, not even the cattle, just this," and he tapped the line by the water's edge. "And the town won't help?" Ruth asked. He shook his head. "No sheriff worth his badge. Town council turns the other way as long as they get their cut, and most folks are too scared to say otherwise." "Then we find someone who isn't," she said. But Alden only gave her a long look, the kind that said he'd run through every name, every neighbor, and found none willing. Ruth didn't argue. She just sat back and folded her arms. "We still have something they don't," she said. Alden raised a brow. "What's that?" She looked toward the stairs where Ethan slept. "Something worth protecting." The next 2 days passed without incident, but neither of them mistook the silence for safety. It was the kind of quiet that settled before a storm, a false calm. Ruth kept herself moving to stay ahead of the dread. She taught Ethan how to knead bread in the morning and how to feed the hens without getting pecked. She showed him how to wipe the dust off the window ledges so the light could come in better. Small things, but things that made the house feel more like home than hiding place. And Ethan, he began to bloom in the smallest ways. He started leaving his room without being called, joined Ruth in the morning without being coaxed. He played the whistle by the porch in the evenings and even hummed once while shelling beans. The boy who once shrank from touch let her fix his collar before church on Sunday, let her tuck the blanket under his chin at night. He hadn't called her anything, not Miss Ruth, not Mama, but the way he looked at her now, like he was waiting to see if she'd still be there in the morning, meant more than any title ever could. Alden noticed it too. He didn't speak on it, not directly, but his eyes lingered longer now when Ruth poured his coffee. He stayed close when they worked the fences, his silence not standoffish but comfortable, like he'd grown used to her voice humming beside him. One evening he brought her a jar of wild honey and set it on the table without a word. She didn't ask where it came from, just smiled. That night she stood on the porch after the others had gone to sleep, wrapped in a shawl against the chill. The stars above were clear, but something in the wind carried unease, and when she turned back toward the house, she knew. They were coming. It happened the next night. Late. The wind had stilled, the air thick with the kind of silence that presses against your skin like breath. Ruth couldn't sleep. Neither could Alden. They both sat in the main room by the cold hearth, sipping weak tea and listening to the night as if it would speak first. Then came the sound. Distant. Low. Hoofbeats. Not one. Not two. Three, maybe four. Ruth stood, her hands already moving to the rifle propped by the doorway. Alden crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. "They're not trying to hide," he said. "Then they think they've already won," Ruth replied. He turned to her. "I need you upstairs with Ethan if they get past me." "No." He blinked. "I didn't come all this way to hide," she said. "And that boy, your boy, needs to see us stand. Not cower, not beg, stand." He didn't argue, just handed her the second rifle and nodded once. Together they stepped outside. The moon was high, throwing long shadows across the yard. The Crawfords rode in slow, lined like judges come to pass sentence. Reed up front, his smirk wide, his coat flapping like wings. Behind him, the other two, Barlow and Seth, spread out like they were circling prey. "Well now," Reed called, "if it ain't the housemaid and the broken rancher, quite the pair." Alden didn't speak. Reed dismounted, unhurried. "You've had your time, Graves. We gave you warnings. You didn't listen." "This land's mine," Alden said, "and I ain't giving it to bullies." "Bullies?" Reed laughed. "No, friend, we're opportunity, we're reality. You can't keep this place up. Can't defend it, not from us." Ruth stepped forward. "Try." Reed looked her over. "You think you scare me, girl." "I don't have to, but you should be scared of a woman who's got nothing left to lose." Seth chuckled from his saddle. "You had a kid, didn't you, back when you was still someone?" Ruth's heart clenched. Reed saw it and smiled cruelly. What happened to him? Too soft to survive. Alden lifted his rifle. "You take one more step," he said, "and I swear by all that's holy it won't be a warning shot." Reed took another step. And Ruth fired. Not at him, not at the horses, but clean into the air. The sound shattered the stillness. Birds scattered from the trees. Ethan's face appeared in the upstairs window, pale and wide-eyed. "Go," Ruth said to Alden. "Get him, lock the door. Don't open it till you hear my voice." Alden hesitated. "Ruth." "Go." He ran. Reed stared at her. "You're bluffing, you ain't got the guts." She cocked the rifle again. "Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Barlow nudged his horse forward. Ruth didn't hesitate. She aimed low and fired again, this time striking the ground near his horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. He cursed and pulled back. "Enough," Reed shouted. "You want to fight, widow, you got one." He drew his pistol. But before he could fire, another shot rang out, this one from the window. "Alden." Reed's hat flew from his head, the bullet grazing just above his scalp. He ducked, cursing, stumbling backward. "We'll be back," he shouted, "and next time we burn it all." Ruth didn't lower her rifle. "You come back," she said, "and you won't be riding out." The Crawfords didn't answer. They mounted fast and disappeared into the trees. Ruth stood in the yard long after they were gone, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Behind her the door opened and Alden stepped out, Ethan in his arms. The boy reached for her without a word. She took him, and he clung to her neck like he never meant to let go. Alden spoke softly. "I didn't know you could shoot like that." "I didn't either," she whispered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, because he knew what she knew. They won the night. But the war wasn't over. The morning after the Crawfords fled, the ranch didn't wake so much as it stirred, cautious, slow, as if the very air remembered what had happened beneath the moonlight. The chickens didn't cluck as loud. The horses shifted warily in the barn. Even the breeze that came through the open windows felt restrained, as though the world was waiting for something to break. Inside the house, Ethan wouldn't leave Ruth's side. He followed her from room to room, not speaking, not crying, just watching her with eyes that asked a question he couldn't yet say aloud. "Are we safe now?" Ruth didn't know the answer. She boiled water, scrubbed the pans from the night before, and kept glancing out the window toward the trail, half expecting dust to rise again on the horizon. But the road was empty, for now. Alden returned from the barn with hay on his shirt and a pistol strapped at his waist. It wasn't hidden this time. He made no effort to appear unbothered. "They'll come back," he said quietly as Ruth poured coffee into a tin mug. "I know." He sat at the table, head bowed, fingers rubbing his temples. "We've pushed them too far now. We humiliated them. Reed won't let that lie, and the others," his voice faded into a low growl, "they've killed for less." Ruth set the mug down gently. "Then we don't wait for them." Alden looked up. "We take the fight to them?" he asked. "No," she said. "We take the truth to someone who'll listen. There has to be someone in town, someone who still cares about law or land or justice." Alden's jaw tightened. "You don't know these people, Ruth. The Crawfords have owned them for years. Coin in every hand, fear in every corner. You speak out, you get ignored. You speak louder, you get buried." "Maybe," she said, "but I've scrubbed floors with men laughing in my face, Alden. I've watched women turn their backs when I needed a single crust of bread. I've been ignored. I've been buried. And I'm still here." He stared at her a long moment, then nodded. "We ride tomorrow," he said, "all three of us, you, me, Ethan." Ruth blinked. He shouldn't see. "He needs to see we don't hide," Alden said, his voice low but firm. "They made him feel helpless once. They made him lose his mother. He needs to know we stand together." She nodded, and for the first time in her life, she felt the kind of strength that didn't come from surviving, but from being believed in. The next morning they rode into town as the sun broke through the thinning clouds. Ethan rode between them on a small gelding, his shoulders drawn but his eyes forward. Ruth wore the best dress she had, which still bore the faint stains of saloon work, but she held her head high. Alden's rifle was strapped to his saddle in full view. The townsfolk noticed. By the time they hit the main street, heads were turning from every window. The saloon doors swung open slowly. The barkeep leaned out. A man sweeping his storefront paused mid-stroke. Even the blacksmith straightened from his anvil, wiping his brow as if trying to decide whether to nod or look away. They went first to the council hall, a dusty office near the courthouse with windows smudged from years of disuse. Inside, Councilman Merrick sat behind a desk piled with outdated ledgers and untouched petitions. He was a thin man with a thick mustache and tired eyes that darted between them the moment they stepped inside. "Mr. Graves," he said, standing halfway, "and Miss Harper, I heard you returned to town." "We need help," Alden said. "We need protection." Merrick shifted uncomfortably. "From who?" "You know who," Ruth said. "The Crawfords. They've cut fences, set fires, threatened our lives." Merrick cleared his throat. "Those are bold accusations, Miss Harper, with no evidence." "They came to our home in the night," Alden snapped. "With guns. My son saw them. My son heard them threaten us." Merrick raised a hand. "Please, I don't doubt your word, but the Crawfords have done a lot for this town. They employ men, donate to church repairs, supply winter feed to the orphanage. And they kill anyone who says different, Ruth said, stepping forward. My boy died 2 winters ago because no one listened. I'm not making that mistake again. Merrick's expression shifted. He looked at Ethan, who stood quietly near the door, his whistle clutched tight. You have no marshal, Ruth said. No sheriff, no law but men like the Crawfords, and that's not law, that's rot. Merrick sank slowly into his chair. I can't stop them, he admitted, but I can make it harder for them. I'll file a public record, a statement. If anything happens to your ranch, the Crawfords will be implicated. It might not stop them, but it'll make others think twice before helping them. Alden nodded. It's something. Merrick looked at Ruth. You really came back just to clean floors? No, she said. I came back to save a boy, and he's not going to lose another home. They left the council hall with more eyes on them than before. Whispers followed them down the street, some laced with pity, others with something like respect. But then came the voice. Well now, if it ain't the heroes of the hour. Reed Crawford stepped out from the saloon, flanked by his brothers. He wore a new coat, fresh boots, but the same cold grin. Back in town already, missed the smell of gin and shame. Alden stepped in front of Ruth and Ethan. We filed a statement, public. You so much as ride past our fence again, you'll answer to more than just me. Reed's smile widened. And you think a piece of paper will stop a bullet? I think the whole town saw us walk in, and they'll hear if anything happens after. Reed's eyes darkened. You're gambling with your lives. No, Ruth said. We're betting on each other and we don't bluff. She took Ethan's hand and led him down the street. Alden followed, never turning his back. Reed didn't stop them. But his brothers watched them go, with the hunger of wolves denied meat. That night back at the ranch, the wind returned. Ruth sat by the hearth with Ethan in her lap, brushing his hair with slow, careful strokes. He hadn't said much since town, but he hadn't asked to leave her side either. Alden stood at the window, watching the trail. You think it worked? Ruth asked. No, he said, but I think it made them nervous. She nodded. We'll need to be ready. Alden turned to her. You ever shot a man before? No. You sure could have fooled me. She gave a small smile. I don't aim to shoot, just to protect. He nodded again. Then said quietly, I meant what I said, about this house breathing again, about Ethan smiling. She looked down at the boy in her lap, now fast asleep. I think he's starting to believe it. Alden's voice dropped. And what about you? Ruth's fingers stilled. She looked up. I'm starting to believe I was meant to be here. And though neither said the words, the air between them warmed. Not with fire, but with something older, steadier. Like the promise of spring after a long, cruel winter. Spring didn't come the next morning, not truly, but there was something in the way the light hit the frost, softer, less brittle. Ruth noticed it as she stepped onto the porch with a tin mug warming her hands. The wind had dropped. The trees no longer groaned under the weight of watching silence. Birds dared a few tentative notes, testing whether it was safe to return. Inside, Ethan still slept. His whistle lay on the nightstand beside him, untouched. Ruth had kissed his brow before coming down, and he hadn't stirred, just turned into her touch, like he trusted the morning not to take anything from him. Alden joined her on the porch not long after, a rifle slung across his back and lines under his eyes that spoke more of thought than fatigue. They're quiet, he said. Too quiet, Ruth replied. He nodded. They stood there for a while, not speaking, watching the land stretch out before them like a warning wrapped in beauty. This ranch, so small by some standards, had become more than earth and timber. It was memory now. It was family. It was everything worth defending. By midday, Alden had saddled 2 horses. I'm going to check the eastern boundary, he said. Riders have been avoiding that route, but I don't want to be caught looking the other way. Ruth nodded. Be careful. He hesitated, then touched her arm gently. If anything happens before I get back. Nothing will, she said firm. Go. He did. Ethan helped her gather kindling after lunch, carrying twigs in his arms like a sacred offering. His cheeks were flushed, not from cold but from pride. Do you think they'll come today? He asked softly. Ruth set her bundle in the crate by the firewood rack. I don't know. Will you protect me again? She turned to him, knelt, and looked him in the eyes. With my life. He didn't blink, just nodded. That afternoon she taught him how to clean the rifle. Not to fire it, he was too young and she wouldn't put that on his shoulders, but to understand it, to respect the weight of it, the danger, the power. He watched with wide eyes and small hands that trembled only once. You were very brave, she told him as they finished. The night they came. I was scared. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of it. Ethan considered that. Are you ever scared? All the time, she said. But you don't show it. I've just had more practice hiding it. He seemed to accept that, and though she hadn't meant it as comfort, it felt like he found some in it anyway. The sound came late that evening. Not the gallop of horses this time, but a knock. Firm. Measured. Not like before, not desperate or frantic, just deliberate. Ruth froze. She set her mug down and went to the door. She didn't open it at once. Who is it? A pause. Then a familiar voice. Merrick, Councilman. She opened the door. The man stood there alone, his hat in hand, his brow damp with sweat despite the chill. I rode hard, he said. Heard something you ought to know. She stepped aside, let him in. Ethan peeked from the loft. They're gathering, Merrick said, not wasting a breath. The Crawfords, tonight, near the ravine. 4 or 5 others with them, gun hands mostly, outlaws that owe them favors. When? Ruth asked. They ride before dawn. She looked toward the trail. Alden's out checking the eastern line. I passed him, Merrick said. Told him to come straight back. He's half an hour behind me. Why are you helping us? Ruth asked, eyes narrowing. The man sighed. Because I'm tired of watching this town rot. Because I've seen too many widows lose everything. Because I never stood up when I should have. But this I can fix. She nodded slowly. We'll be ready. When Alden returned, his face was hard. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Ruth gave him the rundown anyway, positions, numbers where they might breach the fences, where the land gave cover. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, We can't hold them off forever. No, she said, but maybe we don't need to. He tilted his head. We hold long enough for them to make a mistake, long enough for someone else to see what they really are. He considered that. Then we'll need light, he said, fire. They spent the next hour soaking rag strips in oil, wrapping them around wooden poles, torches. Ruth filled lamps and trimmed wicks. Ethan helped too, solemn and quiet, handing things to them with surprising calm. By midnight the ranch looked like a different place, not fortified, not truly, but prepared, ready. The lamps lit the yard in uneven gold. The wind had died entirely. Even the trees were still. Then just before dawn they came. Hooves not rushing, not sneaking. Just approaching like they owned the world. Ruth stood on the porch, rifle in hand. Alden beside her, shotgun resting on his shoulder. Ethan behind them, silent. The Crawfords rode in 5 across, Reed in the center, Barlow and Seth flanking, 2 others, lean men with eyes like knives on either side. Well, Reed called out, ain't this cozy? No closer, Alden said. Reed ignored him, dismounted slow. You think you scared us. You think your little speech in town means anything. It means people are watching, Ruth said, and if we disappear, they'll know why. You won't disappear, Reed grinned. You'll just leave, you'll sell or burn. He stepped forward, and Alden fired. The blast hit the dirt inches from Reed's boot. The outlaw froze. I warned you, Alden said. Barlow growled, you won't get another shot. Ruth raised her rifle, then make this one count. Everything held still. Then Ethan stepped forward. Stop. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. Reed looked at him. Well, look at that, the mute speaks. Ethan walked down the steps. He's not alone, he said, pointing to Alden, then to Ruth, and I'm not afraid of you. Barlow moved. Ruth raised her rifle. But another shot rang out. This one from the trees. A sixth rider. Councilman Merrick. Drop your weapons, he shouted, rifle raised. You're under arrest. The Crawfords turned and found themselves surrounded. Behind Merrick, a half-dozen townsfolk emerged from the woods, men who'd once bowed their heads, now holding rifles with shaking hands and determined eyes. You made a mistake, Merrick said. You pushed too far. Reed snarled, this isn't over. Ruth stepped forward. Yes, it is. He looked at her, rage in his eyes, but fear too. For the first time, fear. He turned and mounted. Come on, he spat to his brothers. And they rode. Not in victory, but in retreat. By midday, the ranch was quiet again. The townsfolk stayed for coffee, awkward but genuine. They helped rebuild the corner of the barn where fire had once blackened the wood. They brought fresh bread and blankets and shy apologies. And when they left, it was different. Not just thanks, but respect. That night, Ethan fell asleep in Ruth's arms. Alden sat across from her, hands folded, staring into the fire. You saved us, he said. No, she whispered, we saved each other. He looked at her a long time, then said softly, I never asked what you lost before all this. Ruth's eyes misted. My son, Samuel, he was just Ethan's age. Alden reached across the table, took her hand. He'd be proud of you, he said. She smiled. I think he would. Outside, the stars shone bright. Inside, the hearth glowed warm. And in the stillness, for the first time, no one listened for danger. Only peace. The days that followed felt different, not in some loud, miraculous way, but like the world had shifted beneath their feet just enough to let light in through cracks once sealed by fear. The air on the ranch felt freer, the silence less like waiting and more like rest. Birds returned in earnest. New shoots of green peeked through the thawing earth, not yet full bloom but promising the season had truly turned. Ruth rose early, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She washed the morning dishes with sunlight warming her face and Ethan's laughter floating in from the porch. He was sitting with Alden on the steps, whittling a stick into something vaguely animal-shaped. The boy was still quiet in many ways, but no longer withdrawn. His eyes tracked everything now, curious, engaged, bright. When he smiled, it didn't flicker like a candle afraid of wind. It burned steady. The saloon floor felt like another life. Alden glanced through the window at Ruth, caught her watching them, and nodded once. A silent greeting that said more than good morning ever could. After breakfast, they set about repairing what still needed mending. The Crawfords had done their damage, but they hadn't broken anything that couldn't be rebuilt. Fences were reset with tighter wire. The back barn door was replaced. Even the burned spot by the chicken coop had been scrubbed down and sanded. Ruth repainted it herself, not because it mattered to the animals, but because it mattered to her, a mark of control reclaimed. Around noon, Councilman Merrick rode in again, this time less like a messenger and more like a friend. He brought a stack of papers tied in string, ink still drying on half the pages. "I thought you might want to see it in writing," he said, handing them over to Alden. "What is it?" Ruth asked, stepping forward, drying her hands on her apron. Alden untied the bundle slowly, his brows lifted. "Deed confirmation," Merrick explained. "Legal boundary affirmations, and a court order restricting any contact from the Crawfords pending investigation." Ruth blinked. "They're being investigated." Merrick nodded. "Not just for what happened here. Turns out you weren't the first ones they pressured, just the first to stand. Once you did, the others found their voices." Alden shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you're staying," Merrick replied. "We need folks like you out here, folks who remind us what decent looks like." He turned to Ruth. "Especially folks like you." She said nothing at first, but her throat tightened. "Thank you," she managed. After Merrick left, they spent the rest of the day moving slower. There was no more rush, no more fear pushing at their backs. Alden let Ethan lead the way to the western pasture, where they laid out a small picnic beside the tree line. Ruth packed bread, cheese, and slices of dried apple. They sat cross-legged in the grass, the wind gentle and the sun kind. Ethan picked up a twig and began drawing shapes in the dirt. "What are you making?" Ruth asked. "A house," he said. "Not like this one, but like the one in my dreams." Ruth exchanged a glance with Alden. "Tell me about it," she said. Ethan thought for a moment, then began describing the house. It had a roof that didn't leak and windows that always caught the morning sun. It had shelves for books and hooks for coats and a bell you could ring when supper was ready. It had a porch swing and a vegetable garden and a dog that wasn't afraid of thunder. Ruth listened with her heart full, not just from what he said, but from the way he said it, as if the house already existed somewhere in his chest. Later, as Ethan dozed under the tree, Alden turned to Ruth. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd have this again." She brushed hair back from her face. "Have what?" "Peace. A reason to work that wasn't just survival. Someone to talk to at the end of the day who actually listens." Ruth smiled faintly. "I listen." "You do more than that," he said. "You see." She looked at him then, and there was a stillness between them. A warm, solid kind of stillness that didn't need to be broken. He reached for her hand, not sudden, not shy. She didn't pull away. "I know we haven't spoken it plain," he said after a long pause. "But if there's room in your heart for me, for this place, then I'd be honored to build something with you." Ruth didn't answer right away. She glanced toward Ethan, curled beneath the tree like a sapling finally finding root. Then she looked back to Alden. "My heart's been empty a long time," she said, "but it's not anymore, so yes, there's room." Alden nodded once, the corners of his mouth softening into the closest thing to joy she'd ever seen on his face. That evening, Ruth returned to the saloon. Not because she had to, not to work, but because she needed to finish something. She walked through the swinging doors as men paused their cards, and the barkeep squinted. "Well now," he said, "didn't expect to see you back." "I didn't come for the job," she replied. "Just a conversation." "Conversation," he echoed. "With who?" "You," she said. She stepped to the center of the room, eyes sweeping across the faces she used to avoid. "Some of you laughed when I scrubbed your spit off the floor. Some of you looked the other way, but none of you knew who I was. None of you saw me." The room went still. "I came back to say this. My worth was never in your hands. I carried grief like an anchor and still stood. I bled and didn't break. I lost everything and chose not to become bitter." She looked directly at the barkeep. "I forgive you." Then turned and left. No one followed. She didn't need them to. She wasn't asking for anything anymore. The next morning, Ethan brought her a bundle wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked. He unwrapped it to reveal a carving rough but clear. A woman, tall, holding a child's hand, A man stood beside her, strong, quiet, and behind them a cabin, a home. "I made it," Ethan said. "For me. For us." Ruth gathered him into her arms. "I love it," she whispered. He didn't pull away. "Do you think you'll stay forever?" he asked. She nodded. "As long as you need me." Ethan's reply came so quiet she almost missed it. "I think I always will." That evening, Ruth stood by the fence at the edge of the property, watching the sky turn gold. Alden joined her without a word, slipping an arm around her waist. "You never asked for any of this," he said. "No," she replied, "but I think I was made for it." They stood like that until the stars returned. Until the land, once marred by threat and sorrow, finally felt like home. That Sunday, Ruth wore a blue dress to church. It had belonged to Alden's late wife, tucked away in a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Ruth hadn't touched it until now, not out of fear or jealousy, but respect. When she finally tried it on, it fit better than she expected, like it had waited patiently for someone to give it a second life. The townspeople watched as she walked in, Ethan holding her hand, Alden at her side. There were no jeers now, no mocking stares. The saloon men she once cleaned after nodded respectfully. The storekeepers smiled, some even standing as she passed. They took their seats in the front pew, and for the first time since she lost her son, Ruth didn't feel like a shadow among the living. After service, children ran through the yard, their voices like bells in the wind. Ethan joined them, laughing as he tumbled into the grass. Ruth stood with Alden beneath the tree just outside the chapel, watching the boy like sunlight in motion. "Do you think he remembers the worst of it?" she asked softly. Alden followed her gaze. "I think he remembers enough to know the difference." They stayed like that until the bell rang for dismissal. Then they walked home, not rushed, not guarded, just together. In early May, Alden brought her to the ridge that overlooked the entire valley. The view stretched wide, fields blooming, fences mended, even the creek glinting in the distance like a silver thread. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her with a small box in his hand. "I wanted to wait," he said finally, "until the threat passed, until the land healed, until we could breathe." Ruth turned to him, heart fluttering. "You don't have to say it." "I know," he said, "but I want to." He opened the box. Inside was a simple band, nothing ornate, nothing flashy, but it shone like hope. "Ruth Harper," he said, voice steady, "will you be my wife?" She didn't cry. She smiled, and said the word like it had always been meant for this moment. "Yes." The wedding was small. Merrick officiated. The townspeople brought food, pies, breads, even a roast hog from the butcher. Ruth wore the blue dress again, and Alden cleaned up the porch, hanging lanterns from the rafters. They said their vows beneath the old tree where Ethan once described his dream home, and when the boy placed a single daisy in Ruth's hand, she nearly buckled from joy. "You're not just marrying him," Ethan whispered. "I know," she replied. "I'm marrying you too." That night, as the last guests departed and the stars emerged one by one, Ruth stood at the edge of the porch, her heart full. Alden stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Ethan sat by the fire, playing his whistle, its notes no longer broken but bright and whole. "This house used to be too quiet," Alden said. "Now it sounds like life." Ruth leaned into him. "Because now it is." Weeks passed. Then months. And one day, Ruth found herself standing in the kitchen with flour on her hands and sunlight pouring through the window. She was humming, nothing in particular, just a tune Ethan liked. Her belly had begun to swell beneath her apron, barely noticeable but unmistakable. Alden entered, muddy boots, tired smile. He kissed her cheek. "How's our boy?" he asked. "Napping," she said. "Fought it, of course, swore he wasn't tired." He chuckled, "Stubborn like someone I know." She raised an eyebrow. You. He grinned. You. She rolled her eyes and handed him a slice of warm bread. As they ate, the whistle sounded from the porch. Not Ethan's old one. A new one carved by Alden, shaped by Ruth's hands, gifted just a day before. Ruth stepped outside and found Ethan sitting with the dog, playing his melody while the pup wagged its tail in rhythm. He looked up. Is it good? Ruth smiled. It's perfect. Behind her, Alden joined them, slipping an arm around her again. Can I show you something? Ethan asked, standing. He led them around the house to where he'd drawn shapes in the dirt, his dream home, traced and redrawn every few days as the rain washed it away. This time, though, he'd added something new. A second house. Smaller. Beside the first. Ruth looked down, heart aching with love. Is that for the baby? She asked. Ethan nodded. I want them to have a dream too. She knelt, hugging him close. They will, she whispered, because they'll have us. The land didn't forget its storms. The wind still came sometimes, harsh and cold, but the ranch no longer bent with fear. It stood. Because of Ruth. Because of Alden. Because of a boy who learned to trust again. And because sometimes family isn't given. It's made. From ash, from sorrow, from second chances. They mocked her once for scrubbing floors, for surviving. But now when people spoke of Ruth Graves, they didn't mention the saloon. They mentioned the house where love lived.